"Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to give up your seat, or we'll have you removed." The words sliced through the hush of the first-class cabin. Darrell James didn't flinch. He looked up from his boarding pass. Seat 1A. Purchased. Assigned. Paid in full. Across from him, a white man in a golf cap sneered, reclining deeper into seat 1B, his elbow already spilling past the divider. The flight attendant, tall, blonde, with an airline pin that caught the sunlight, stood stiffly like a judge ready to pronounce a sentence. "You heard her," the man muttered. "This section ain't for everyone." The cabin wasn't loud. But it tightened. Passengers shifted, glanced, and looked away. Darrell remained still, hand resting on his briefcase. On the seat pocket in front of him, a crumpled napkin bore the airline's motto, "We honor every passenger." He stared at it. Then at her. She avoided his gaze. The officer was already walking up the aisle. And no one, not one person, spoke. He paused. They couldn't breathe. The officer stood firm, one hand resting on his belt, the other gesturing toward the aisle. "Final warning, sir. Vacate the seat or face legal consequences." His tone was even, rehearsed, like this wasn't the first time he'd said it today. Darrell didn't move. He placed his boarding pass on the tray table, calm, deliberate. The small square of paper looked almost fragile next to his weathered hand. He glanced toward the window, not looking at anyone. Not begging. Amy, the flight attendant, shifted uncomfortably. Her voice, moments ago clipped and sharp, now wavered. "It's not personal. We just had an adjustment." "An adjustment?" Darrell repeated, eyes still fixed outside. "I paid for this seat 3 weeks ago. You adjusted who deserved to sit in it." A murmur rippled through the cabin, then hushed. No one wanted to be part of this. The officer stepped forward. "You're resisting removal." The man in the golf cap chuckled. Well, maybe next time he should stick to economy. Darrell stood up, but not to leave. He reached for his briefcase, then slowly sat back down, his knuckles white around the handle. His shoulders slumped, but not in defeat, more like restraint. From the row behind, someone lifted their phone, discreetly filming. Another passenger tugged their child's hoodie over their head, whispering, "Just keep your eyes down." No one helped. No one intervened. They all watched a man with a valid ticket being punished for existing too confidently in a space that had already decided he didn't belong. Outside the window, a fuel truck passed by. Inside, time felt like it had stopped. And somewhere between the silence and the stares, a faint clink echoed, his belt buckle, unfastened as if preparing to comply. But his eyes said otherwise. A little girl across the aisle blinked up at him, clutching a stuffed lion. He gave her the smallest nod. She smiled back. And then a voice from row 2 said quietly, "I know who he is." He didn't turn around. But his fingers loosened. A breath later, a folded photo slipped from his bag onto the floor. It landed face up. A newspaper clipping. His face. The caption, "James confirmed as chair of National Infrastructure Board." And no one, not even the officer, picked it up. The cabin door hadn't closed. The delay stretched. Passengers fidgeted. But Darrell didn't speak. He bent down, retrieved the clipping without a word, folded it once, and slid it back into his coat pocket. The officer shifted. "Sir, if you don't comply." Darrell stood again, slowly. This time, he didn't reach for his bag. He reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a dark leather wallet. Inside, a single badge glinted, subtle, official, undeniable. A hush fell over the front cabin. He turned slightly, voice calm, eyes locked with the officer's. "You're threatening the federal official who oversees national aviation funding. I suggest you think that through." The words weren't loud. But they didn't need to be. Amy staggered back half a step. Her mouth opened, closed. Behind her, the man in 1BS smirk evaporated. Darryl didn't yell. He didn't boast. He simply reached into his briefcase and placed a folder onto the tray table, marked with the emblem of the U.S. Department of Transportation. Inside, the quarterly review notes of airline performance and conduct evaluations. His signature was on every page. Someone gasped audibly. The man filming behind lowered his phone, then slowly stood and said, "Sir, please, you should keep the seat." Darryl looked at him, gave a slight nod, but said nothing. I didn't know," Amy stammered. He looked at her, tired. "That's the problem. You didn't need to know. You just needed to respect the ticket." For a second, the entire cabin seemed frozen. Then a voice from the galley called forward, "Is he clear to remain seated?" It was the captain. The officer hesitated. Darryl picked up the folder, stepped past Amy, and walked to the cockpit entrance. He handed the captain the file. "I'm not here to retaliate. I'm here to fix the system you've let rot." The captain, who hadn't said a word until now, removed his hat. "Understood, sir. Please, return to your seat." As Darryl turned back, the aisle cleared like parting water. No one made eye contact. He didn't need to look proud. He just walked. And when he sat again, the napkin with the airline's motto still lay crumpled in front of him. But this time, someone had smoothed it out. No one spoke as Darryl sat back down. The man in the golf cap now stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, hands buried between his knees. Amy hovered in the galley, her back stiff, her lips pressed into a line that couldn't decide between shame and defiance. The officer who once stood tall beside Darryl now stood behind him, uncertain, his authority shriveled without a command. A young flight attendant, barely mid-twenties, stepped forward timidly, kneeling beside Darryl's seat. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a fresh cup of water and a rolled towel on his tray. "I'm sorry, sir. I saw your name on the boarding list, but I didn't realize." He didn't respond right away. He simply looked at her. Kind eyes, but tired. Then a faint smile, just enough to release the tension in the space around them. "It's not about my name. It's about yours. Don't forget who you are next time you're asked to choose silence." She nodded, eyes wet, and stood. From row 6, the woman with the child, the one who'd whispered, "Don't look," now reached across the aisle, tugging gently at Amy's sleeve. "You should be the one offering that water. Not her." Amy didn't answer. But she walked over. She placed her tray down in front of Darryl, lips tight. "Would you like anything else, sir?" He stared at the tray. Then up at her. "You called me, sir, now. But earlier. I was a problem to be moved. I was just following protocol." "No. You were following assumptions." Her shoulders sagged. She didn't argue. Then, slowly, she bowed her head. "I'm sorry." He picked up the towel, wiped his fingers, and handed it back. "It's not me you owe." She turned, facing the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we made a mistake. We judged a man not by his conduct, but by his color. That will not happen again, not on my flight." Someone clapped once. Then another. Then the cabin joined in, not thunderous, but real. And Darryl? He just leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. Outside, the runway shimmered in the late sun. But inside, something had shifted. The plane touched down in Dallas just after sunset. As passengers gathered their bags, the aisle filled with tension, not the kind from delays or missed connections, but the kind that lingers after a truth has been spoken and cannot be taken back. Darryl stood last. He waited. Not because he was weak. But because he was watching. Amy approached one final time, holding a small notepad. I wrote down what you said. About names. About assumptions. I want to remember it. He nodded once, then stepped into the jet bridge. Waiting there was a sharply dressed man in a navy suit, holding a placard, Mr. Darrell James, Office of Federal Infrastructure. Cameras flashed. A reporter whispered into her mic, "The man nearly arrested on Flight 332, is the very man who holds its funding." Passengers exiting behind him paused, some in shock, others in silence. The young flight attendant from earlier stood at the exit door, hands folded. He turned to her. She said nothing. But she stood a little taller. Inside the airport, a young black boy stared at him from across the terminal, holding his mother's hand. Darrell caught his gaze, then gently lifted the folded napkin from his coat pocket and placed it in the trash. He didn't need its motto anymore. He was writing a new one. And as he disappeared into the crowd, the boy whispered, "Mom, who was that man?" She smiled. Someone who changed the rules, without ever raising his voice. Here is the final closing segment, delivered exactly as requested, a reflective ending with a moral takeaway and gentle call to action, flowing seamlessly from the last scene.